In the name of God, the Holy and Undivided Trinity. Amen. Please be seated. I think most of you know that I spent about 2 years living in Scotland between 2016 and 2018 in 2 batches. First during the final year of my bachelor's program, and then back again a few months later to do a master's course in theology at the intersection of queer studies, practical theology, and creative writing. I moved to Scotland knowing no one. I think it's probably not a surprise to any of us that I quickly made friends. Among classmates and other locals I encountered along the way through church, through the neighborhood cafe or the local pub, and through a knit and natter group that I attended on Wednesday afternoons. I don't struggle with meeting people, neither talking to them. That's one of the perks of extroversion, so I'm told. But during that first day in Glasgow, I made enough friends to get me through. I had easily made friends in 3 of the 4 students that I shared a flat with in university housing. But my closest friends were folks that I met in lectures, as I think is probably common in the experience of students, especially theology students. My course in pastoral theology was especially small, me and 9 other students, most of them Presbyterians, just like the rest of Scotland. And I sat in the back, nearest both the wall-mounted radiator and the window, learning quickly that the weather in those 200-plus-year-old buildings can vary rapidly across the span of a 3-hour class. But when you spend a certain amount of time in deep, intense conversations about personal theological beliefs and experiences, deep fondness grows between words and smiles, and true friendship is born. Other experiences along the way deepen those bonds, often forging lifelong friendships with pretty remarkable people. One of those classmates was a woman called Deborah, who was doing training to become a Church of Scotland minister. And on the first day of our pastoral theology class, she sat with me in the back row to take advantage of the radiator and to probably make sure that I, the strange student, wasn't sitting alone. And during those first 3 months of my time there, our conversations were pleasant. Deborah often took the role of the mom friend and ensured I'd been eating, getting out, taking care of myself. Our acquaintance-level friendship changed the morning of November 9th, 2016, when my phone rang in the middle of a panic attack I was having as I stood in St. Mary's Cathedral Close after morning prayer. Deborah was calling, suspecting I, an American abroad, might need company after hearing the result of the 2016 election. 20 minutes later, Deborah had made the drive down from Bear's Den to collect me from Belzal Court, and we drove back up into the suburbs to Dobby's Garden Center in Mulgai, where we had tea and cake and commiseration. Then we headed back to her house in Bear's Den, where we sat and watched British coverage of the election, which if you didn't see it, it's worth watching. True friendship was born that day, one that I greatly relied on when I returned to Glasgow a few months later. When I went back that next August, I quickly reconnected with Deborah and then made other friends along the way, especially Christy and Dave, other American students studying at the university. Dave and Christy over the next year would become my adventure buddies, joining me on weekly trips to do some sightseeing, exploring the breathtaking landscapes and ancient ruins all across the countryside. Many months of adventuring later, Deborah called me on June 21st to see if I'd want to join her husband, Brian, and her daughter, Lisa, for a hill walk, as it was the longest day of the year, and the sun wouldn't set until well past 10 p.m. With Christy and Dave out of town, I thought, oh, why not? Hill walking, we would call mountain climbing. But I hopped down the steps out of my flatbox onto the ScotRail platform at Annie's Land and went 12 minutes north to Bear's Den, where Brian and Lisa collected me. We set out through the windy roads of Dumbartonshire toward Rower Denon on the eastern shore of Loch Lomond. And above that eastern shore towers the craggy-topped Ben Lomond, whose peak sits 974 meters, 3196 feet, above the bonny banks of Loch Lomond. We gathered up our kit and began our 4-hour ascent to the top of this gorgeous hill. And this hill walk is one of my favorite memories of living in Scotland. Not only did we have the longest day of the year working to our advantage, but the sky was sunny and blue, a rarity of Scottish June. From the top of the mountain, you can see Ben Nevis, Scotland's tallest Munro, or mountain. The Ochils and Pentlands to the east, and out to the Isles of Mull, Islay, and Arran to the west. Not to mention the beautiful views of Loch Lomond from tip to tail, and all of its islands just below. One could sit there and marvel at life's vastness and the interconnectedness of all things for hours and still feel inspired. Getting to the top was easy because we took the tourist route. The hour-and-a-half descent was a different story. And that's normally how these mountaintop experiences go. They're inspiring, but fleeting. We spend all of our time anticipating what lies at the top of the hill, and we get there, and we're captive in awe at the beauty we see. Lush green landscape dotted with grazing sheep and the occasional outcropping of rocks. And then we have to turn around and go down the steep trail back to the car as it gets dark and the bugs come out. And then we ride home in near silence, both with our minds treasuring those moments we spent at the top, looking out to the curve of the horizon, but also finding ourselves tired from the experience of the hill walk. But the reality is that much of life is this way. We spend most of our lives in metaphor, climbing to the tops of mountains and retreating again back into the valleys, leaving us tired and longing to stand in awe of what's before us again. And when we're on that mountaintop, many of us want to be like Peter, to build a dwelling place, a place of memory where we domesticate and institutionalize the presence of God. Because we're so in awe of it. We're so captive to how beautiful it is, how warm and radiant that light is. And we don't want to go back down the hill, walking away from that feeling of complete dumbfoundedness and marvel, just wanting to revel in the closeness of God, sitting in the bosom of the one who created us, with the people who mean the most to us. But then we're asked not to share with any others what we've encountered. And maybe we couldn't. We didn't have the words. And the loneliness sets in as we descend and return to our normal, boring lives. And we're forced to accept it. And not only accept that, but to accept that we're also simple humans who can't reach God in that same way. Because we're held back by too many things, confronted by conflicting challenges, by our humanity and its prejudice and discrimination, by our attachment to things and the mechanized drive of capitalism and its resulting destruction. And as we continue to descend that mountain, walking toward Jerusalem and our own fated death, our bodies and minds are too tired to focus on trying to find ways to protect the good. And instead, we try to fence in and savor whatever memory we have of what we saw on the heights. That free-range, rambling Jesus that spoke between law and prophet. The radical rabbi who can summon the presence of angels, about whom a voice speaks through the cloud, "This is my son, the beloved." But we can't stay in that little bubble on top of the mountain. And if we stay there, we can't reach the place of freedom. We too have to use that mountaintop experience to be transfigured, to be transformed into something that isn't afraid of death, but looks toward the promise of resurrection. That transfiguration, the transformation, isn't meant to be bottled and preserved under layers of thick dust, but is instead meant to ignite us and sustain us as we transform the things that surround us, as we revolutionize our present to be a place that doesn't get bogged down in self-protecting loneliness, but reaches out and connects with others to build networks of friends and lovers who nurture us and free us from angst, who walk with us along difficult roads, who provoke us to change and improve ourselves because they see in us who we have been created to be. A people who believe we have been called to transform the world, to be a place where God's loving, liberating, life-giving presence is known. And not to be a people who get caught in the valleys and solemnity and suffering of Lent, but who can be transformed enough through that to stand on the mountaintops of rejoicing and flourishing in Easter. That transformation calls us to embrace the resilience, the grace, the courage, the sense of adventure that will take us to that mountaintop, even if we have to take the more difficult route. Amen.